Hello, gamers. Today's another educational episode on fleet composition. Today's episode is called, It's Giving Midline Energy. Like, it's literally giving cruiser doctrine right now. That's something I heard on social media, the whole it's giving. I don't know. I mean, I can kind of tell what it means, but also, what does it mean? Why does it mean? And most importantly, how does it mean? Well, regardless of what it means, I'm going to try and find a way to give this episode an even dumber title on YouTube. Maybe something like, She Midlines Until I Cruiser Doctrine. It's not misleading, but it is a weird way of phrasing that. Let's start with talking about the Pegasus. Even with the nerfs to the Hurricanes, 4 of them linked together is still really good. It's just the way that it is. You kind of can't get around it. When you stack up a bunch of high explosive damage all in one big volley, it turns out it's pretty good. At least in player hands. This, unfortunately, is one of those flagships that you really cannot set to autopilot, even for a few seconds, because what's going to happen is it's going to try and dump 16 Hurricanes into a frigate to finish it off. Now, with that much ordnance flying, it's probably going to get the job done, but maybe not the best use of that ammunition. This is one of the rare capital ships where S-modding turret gyros doesn't feel like the best option. Like, it's still good, but as you can see here, I didn't even bother. Because the main thing that you're trying to do is use those Hurricanes to deliver a surgical strike on enemy cruisers and enemy capital ships. And yeah, the turret gyros would give you 5% to cruisers, but I would really rather have extra capacitors and that hardened shields on this thing, because in the late game you're really going to need that shield durability. And even without turret gyros, it still does a decent enough job killing off enemy frigates with 4 gravitons and a couple of hypervelocity drivers. And that really is the best loadout I can think of. There's definitely other things that you can do, and some of them might be better, but so far what I've really found to be very reliable and very easy to pilot is to just slap those 4 Hurricanes and then try to make the rest of the ship about that kinetic damage. 4 gravitons, it's a little excessive since the debuff stops stacking at 10%, but that soft flux pressure is still nice. I've tried Auto Lance, and the Auto Lance is really good, but I think graviton is the way to go for this thing. And the difference between heavy autocannon and hypervelocity driver, as you might be aware, there's this thing called recoil in this game, and the way that recoil works in Star Sector specifically is it causes shots to spread off-center, and being in hardpoints cuts that in half. So, for a weapon like the HVD, which has no recoil, putting it in turret slots doesn't really have a downside, whereas the heavy autocannon, which has a lot of recoil, not something that's exactly listed. I mean, there's like an accuracy which says very poor, which sort of hints at the idea that this has a lot of recoil, but it doesn't exactly spell out precisely how the mechanics work. Which, if it did, would probably be a bit much, because then it'd also have to include like projectile velocity. And honestly, even when people try to include those in mod weapons, you never really can understand the feel and how to use a weapon until you actually see it in action. Reading off the number sheet is just not going to work. So, not including it's probably for the best. But in any case, heavy autocannons work really well in the hardpoints. HVDs work really well in the turrets. Even with the range mismatch, I like it a lot. The HVDs give you that long-range damage. And then when the enemy gets closer, you're going to be over your flux dissipation. But that's, like, not an issue, right? It's one of those things where at long range, you're going to be under your flux. Your flux usage is going to be under your dissipation because these things are not going to be active. But when the enemy gets closer, you're going to start building up soft flux in order to fire off all of this extra kinetic DPS, which is going to drive up their hard flux. That's a good trade. Trading soft flux for hard flux is a good trade, especially if it can get them to back off or get their hard flux high enough that you can then pelt them with your Hurricanes. One thing I've also done with this fleet is I think I've got ECCM package on basically everything and S-modded, so even when the Remnants have a ton of ECM, we're just completely ignoring the range penalty, which this fleet cares a lot about range, so that's a good idea. Although it does have a lot of ECM as well, But now that both fleets, even if you win the ECM war and you have the bigger number, you're still going to get some range penalty. So that change to the ECM mechanics has actually made S-modded ECCM a little bit better. Although that probably wasn't the point, it is nice. It is nice. I've even got enough extra ordnance points that I put a flat cannon on the back, although, now that I think about it, I'd probably just rather have more flux capacity. The burst PDs are definitely necessary. They catch torpedoes. They give you something that shoots at fighters. I'm not going to drop those. But the flat cannon, yeah, let's do this. And then I'm just going to cheat to get that CR back. Hey, look, that's console commands. Don't tell anybody. Yeah, S-modded flux distributor because I don't have ordnance expertise. This fleet is going in... I mean, I want to use cybernetic augmentation. I want to use... which then means I want to use a bunch of these skills so that I can get the elite skills up so that it actually does something. And then I want to use the carrier skills. So, yeah, we're not going into yellow. Unfortunately, no industry skills today. But I get to show off electronic warfare and how the new version is so good. I don't think... I've definitely talked about it before, but I don't think I've actually shown why it's so good. Because normally, you really need some fast point capping ships. But in this case, we don't really have any. Like, monitors are frigates. But as far as frigates go, they're pretty slow. And then even if they get there at the same time as the enemy, they're not going to kill the enemy frigate anytime soon. So being able to... like, they're not going to be good at capturing points, no matter how you slice it. And honestly, I thought these were nerfed, but I guess that's just in the upcoming patch, and they actually haven't done it yet. Because they're getting delicate machinery as a way to nerf the safety override build, which is completely deserved. They totally had it coming. Not only did a monitor shank my grandma in the backyard yesterday, which was just, I mean, very rude, totally uncalled for. Like, what do you think this is, England? No, you don't do that here, all right? This is North America. But also, it's just kind of broken, because it gives it way too much dissipation with flux shunt, and also makes up for one of the weaknesses of the monitor, which is its low speed. So nerfing that specific build, absolutely deserved. So with that being said, I've made this build preemptively as a way to show that the monitor is still pretty good even without safety override, although I wouldn't go reckless with it. I would go aggressive. With the safety overrides, you could make it reckless and it would just charge into the middle of the enemy fleet. No problems. Now, not so much. I wouldn't do that. I would stick to just making it aggressive. And then if you really need it to go and get unhinged and go sicko mode on the enemy, then you can just give it a manual eliminate order and it'll do the same thing. But now, if you need it to back off, you can cancel the eliminate order and it'll back off. Yeah, so with this layout, helmsmanship and unstable injector are there to try and get that speed up as much as possible. Combat endurance and field modulation to max out its shield durability, along with S-modded shield conversion, hardened shields, S-modded flux distributor, 15 vents, you know the drill. Or at least I hope so. And then, of course, I snuck in elite gunnery implants, because that, between the two of them, adds 8%. And since we're using electronic warfare anyways as a way to capture the points effectively, that gets us up to a clean 19%. And then we've got these carriers, which conveniently have a few spare ordnance points, or maybe a few S-mod slots that we could shove ECM units into to get that number even higher. So overall, this fleet will have 29% before you consider the capture points themselves, which is a pretty good number. It's absolutely going to dominate any human fleet and puts up a respectable effect against remnant fleets. It's usually going to get them around 4 to 5% range penalty. Not a lot, but it is something, especially when this fleet focuses so much on range. Hurting the enemy range has a lot of value. So monitors, you're going to see they're still very effective, and that loadout should work very well. Falcons, I've been pretty happy with, actually. I know a lot of people don't like them, and a lot of people don't like equals either. There's a lot of good reasons to be skeptical. The big one being their main weapons, the ballistics, are hardpoints right at the front of the ship. But I don't think people really understand the specific reason this causes an issue. So let me break this down in simulation. The AI really does not want to be flanked, and for good reason. If the enemy gets behind you and in front of you, they're going to be shooting at you and getting on your armor, even if you still have flux capacity left. Not good. So what the AI likes to do with frontal shields is if, let's say I've got an enemy to my left and to my right, instead of pointing at one of them and letting the other one get an opportunity to sneak around, it likes to kind of keep its nose in between the two targets so that the shield can block both of them. If your kinetics are up here, that's an issue. So there's a few ways you can deal with it. Number one, omni-shield conversion. Just give it omni-shields. Now that you've decoupled the shield from the direction of the ship, it can point at whatever it wants and then point the shield in a completely different direction. That works. Option number two is to azimuth extended shields so it's got a full 360-degree arc. This also works because the AI is aware when it has a full 360-degree shield, and it'll be more willing to let something get behind it because it knows that it doesn't matter as much because it can still block there. In fact, if you want, you can do both by azimuthing omni-shield conversion and the extended shields. You can absolutely go for that. In this case, I've not gone with either of those options. Instead, what I've done is I've just given it a very long-range loadout. This also works just simply because if the enemy doesn't get close to you in the first place, they're not going to flank you. And then suddenly it's not an issue. On top of that, I think long-range loadouts really take advantage of the Falcon's unique position as being it's the cheapest, real cruiser. So getting that cruiser-grade targeting unit on such a cheap ship with such a high top speed, it's got that unique combination of high top speed, high range that I've definitely talked about before. But I think I've evolved the way that I built them, especially now that the auto lance has come out. Before, I was really into using ion beams as a way to just make it disable enemy ships. Now, I think that auto lances are a really, really good call here, partly because they're cheap, they're easy on the flux, so you can afford a lot more stuff alongside of them, compared to, say, ion beams, which are going to cost you 4 more each, so that's 8 more, and then you also need significantly more flux to feed into them. But on top of that, it makes them so much better at killing frigates, because frigate-grade armor melts pretty quickly under the fragmentation damage, and then their hull just evaporates. So ion beams, those versions of the ship struggle to kill frigates, which is a bit of a problem. But with expanded magazines and auto lances, it can melt them pretty quickly and then move on to other things. That's pretty good. And it still manages to be a decent support ship with the kinetic damage and the salamanders. It's just really good for harassment, and it's also better at killing frigates than they were before. I think the Falcon sort of got indirectly buffed by the existence of auto lances because it has made this type of build a lot more usable, a lot more effective. Still going with ballistic mastery, like that elite ballistic mastery is very important for making sure the projectiles are actually fast enough to hit frigates reliably. On top of that, going into shield defenses because, it's a light cruiser. It's not going to do well with armor or hull. And it's already invested in mobility, so I wouldn't exactly call it hit-and-run tactics because it's not a short-range ship. It's a long-range ship. It's more like kiting the enemy tactics, and then shields are there for when the enemy incidentally gets close enough to shoot back. But most of the time, it's going to outrange the enemy and keep its distance, which is very annoying. But I found it pretty effective. The champion is pretty all-round reliable. I really want to make a closer range build work for it, but I have never been satisfied. Heavy needlers in these slots give you a lot of kinetic damage, and then they match up range with a plasma cannon or an autopulse. And then because it's now closer range, you could slap a cyclone in this slot, and all of those weapons are really good, but I've never really been satisfied with using them on a champion. It's never quite seemed to be just quite there. Because in the mid-game, you don't really have enough S-mods or the right combination of piloting skills to actually feed enough flux into those weapons without sacrificing all of your durability. Because they're pretty flux-hungry, so you need that. And then you also need the missile skill for the Cyclone. But then because it's a closer range ship, you also need to invest more into durability because it's going to get shot more. And you just don't have enough points to do all of those things at once. And by the time you get to the late game where you can do all of those things at once, it's going up against battleships and dying anyways, despite its big stats. Compared to that, just giving it longer range seems to work way better in the late game. And so that's what I've gone with here, and it's just a classic combination. 1,000 range kinetics, plus a squall, plus a tachyon lance. It's simple, but it works. And once again, S-modded the ECCM package so that everything gets to... Does the music sound weird? Or is there any music at all? Oh, there it is. It came back. The music got scared. It was intimidated by all of the knowledge that's being dropped. And I had to invite it back. At first it refused, but I'm very persuasive. The music eventually came back. Why am I describing it to you? You were there. You saw the whole character arc. You saw music go from being very shy to being very outspoken and aggressive. And then having to learn humility again and finding a right balance between those two things. You were there. Like the whole... There was an entire anime that just happened and we were all watching it together. So I don't know why I'm trying to describe it to you. You saw it with your own eyes. I mean, there's not really too much to say here. It's not like overload it with hull mods. It's mostly just flux stats, a solid combination of weapons, and hey, it's got a shield arc that leaves the back end vulnerable. Maybe put some burst lasers there. And then ignore all the other slots because they don't matter too much. I want to make them good, but I've never, once again, that's a thing I've never been satisfied with. Even with tactical lasers. Like, in theory, you could go with, like, graviton beams and a high-intensity laser and tactical lasers. You could do that. Still never quite feels worth it. It's a big investment for how much exactly on your return on investment. Over here, systems expertise is pretty good. I've definitely considered going with the elite systems expertise here because this is one of the rare ships that can actually do shields, armor, and hull all at the same time. And so that minus 10% damage, that 10% damage reduction applying to all three is pretty good. So hypothetically, you could make a really tanky champion with like elite combat endurance, elite systems expertise, damage control, impact mitigation, hardened shields. Like you could stack all of these things up. I mean, the problem is you wouldn't have much left for the weapons, and if it's not shooting the enemy, it's not doing a whole lot. Which the monitor is okay with, but a champion, it needs to be doing some damage. There's 25 deployment points. But yeah, I think the officer skills focusing on offense has worked out pretty well. Once again, focusing a lot on range with the 1,000 range, and then also gunnery implants. Let's see, is there anything really exciting here? Oh yeah, there's the heron. There's definitely a few different ways of going about this with the fighter loadout. You could go interceptors to make it really good at killing frigates. You can go with like triple cobra to make it really effective against larger targets. And then you've got the classic combination of broadsword, longbow, dagger. Which I don't really like on the Mora, but on the Heron I think it works pretty well. And some people might be scratching their head at expanded deck crew, some people might think it's obvious. It's in a weird spot balancing-wise where if your ship is death spiraling down to 30% replacement rate, this doesn't really do much. But on the flip side, if your ship is already sitting above 80 to 90% throughout the battle, then once again, it's not really doing much. Those numbers are just low enough that it very rarely matters. And I think this case specifically, the broadsword longbow dagger combination, it just barely tips it over to being stable. Because in longer battles, without expanded deck crew, I've definitely seen a few death spirals where they go down to like 30-40% replacement rate. But with expanded deck crew, it consistently stays above 80%. So it's just at that tipping point. Well, I mean, partly, let's not forget, I've also got carrier group here. But it's just at that tipping point where I think expanded deck crew actually makes a difference, which is pretty rare. But I think that's fair in terms of design. If expanded deck crew was too good, you would just throw it on every carrier. It would be a no-brainer. And the way that it is right now, there's a few situations where it makes a difference, and so it's kind of niche, but it's not useless. And I like that balancing. It's definitely better than it being all over the place. And in this case, I've used my S mods to slam in an ECM package and a nav relay, because long range plus having a speed bonus from the nav relay is pretty good. I mean, normally I would get it from coordinated maneuvers, since I do advocate for frigate supremacy quite a lot. But since we're not doing that today, we've got to get our nav relay from somewhere else. They've got a few extra S-mod slots. I mean, what am I going to put there? A targeting unit? Doesn't really need it. That's what, I mean, sure, you could put a hypervelocity driver here, but the DPS from just one of those is never going to be great, and you can't really support it with these small energy slots. Like a battle carrier heron's definitely cute, but it really wouldn't be my first choice. I like this loadout specifically here. I've tried triple trident. I believe I've shown triple trident before, and the verdict I've come to is it's really not worth it. Even setting aside the 75 ordnance points that it takes, I just don't think it's that effective. It's a bit the tridents are too slow to chase down frigates, and then the extra firepower that they give against cruisers and capitals, I'd rather use cobras. This case, it hits just that sweet spot that with targeting feed, it's able to kill frigates pretty reliably and still provide decent fire support to help finish off enemy cruisers. It's not quite as good at either one as a more extreme loadout, but I think in this case it's managed to use the balanced loadout pretty well. The Resonator is obviously just really good. It's the only Omega weapon I'm actually using here. ECCM helps it consistently hit frigates. Elite Missile Specialization, with that recharge bonus, just gives it a straight DPS upgrade. I think helmsmanship is pretty important here, because it really does need that mobility. It's only got, 8,100 flux capacity. Its shields aren't great, so it really does need that mobility to stay away from the enemy and not die. And then the point defense skill not only boosts its own point defense, but also the PD lasers on the longbow, which it's kind of doing a little bit of both. It's got fighters, and it's killing enemy fighters. It's giving you control of the airspace, just what we like to see. And then, of course, the conquest. Under AI control, it's going to be pretty good. I did have railguns in these medium slots, and I was using hardened shields, and it was just getting into trouble a little bit more than I would like, even with a cautious officer. So in this case, I've opted to just drop those. It's going to have less DPS, and then I can get my heavy armor and my armored weapon mounts, which, for whatever reason, seem to work a lot better on the conquest. Mathematically speaking, hardened shields should be pretty good, just because it has a large flux capacity. But maybe it's something to do with the AI. Maybe because the AI is only going to back off above a certain percentage of its flux capacity being used, that the heavy armor works better. And also partly because I built it symmetrical, so heavy armor kind of counts twice, because it can fight with one side, and then if the armor gets stripped off, it can flip over and fight with the other side. It kind of gets double the value. But yeah, Mjolnirs with... if you want to use the Conquest earlier on, you've got to use Gauss cannons. You've got to get that range. It really needs that range. But once you've got Ballistic Mastery and Gunnery Implants, that gives you the range with Mjolnirs instead, which much better DPS. So if you can get there, then you should use the Mjolnirs instead. Thrown in Squalls because, this already has all the Hurricanes, so having Squalls and a bunch of other ships opens up a lot more opportunities for you to use your Hurricanes. Then it's got some Harpoons to help it finish off targets on its own, same with the Auto Lances. And then, of course, resistant flux conduits and a couple burst PDs to make sure that the engines stay defended. As much as, I unfortunately just don't have enough skill slots to actually squeeze in impact mitigation. These 5 skills that I'm showing right now, kind of the most important. I'd love to squeeze in impact mitigation, but I can't. Not because not only, it's really good here, not only because it helps the armor build that it's going for, but also protects the engines, which is really important. So in this case, not having it means got to go with burst PDs, resistant flux conduits. And I think this is the one ship in the fleet with advanced turret gyros. Normally something I would use a lot more, and I've definitely talked about the virtues of this S-mod quite a lot. But in this case, this is the only one using it. Let's see. Don't think there's really much else to talk about here. Oh, right, one more thing to mention. Combat endurance, giving that extra CR, is kind of... It's very an easy pick that I shove on 90% of my ships, but I think the Conquest is one case where I skip it a lot of the time because there's just too many other important things that it wants. Like, it really wants elite helmsmanship to give it that extra mobility. It really wants ballistic mastery and gunnery implants for that extra range. It really, really wants missile specialization because it's got so many missiles. It also wants target analysis because more damage. And then after that, you're still going to want, like, impact mitigation. Or even if you're doing a shield build, then probably field modulation. So you can never quite find the room for combat endurance. And being a capital ship, it also doesn't need the extra peak performance. And speaking of peak performance, you do want to consider putting hardened subsystems on herons. They're one of the cruisers with the lowest peak performances. In this case, I think with combat endurance and a fleet that kills the enemy fast enough, it's fine. But if you're going for a longer, if you're going for like, 300%, 400% bonus XP, or your fleet just takes longer to kill the enemy, or you're just earlier in the game and you haven't quite optimized your fleet to the point that it can kill basically everything at a fast pace, there's a lot of good reasons to put hardened subsystems on this thing. It benefits a lot. Which is probably a good design choice considering it's the fastest carrier. And carriers are basically, fighter bays are basically long-range weapons, so having a fast carrier just kite you forever would be really annoying. And I think it was a deliberate choice to lower the peak performance so that it's not as good at that. I think that covers most of what I want to say about the loadouts. So let's just stop talking about it and actually do the thing. 248%, a decent amount. There's a couple of Alpha Core Radiants, as well as a bunch of other stuff. The other stuff doesn't matter as much. It's going to die. Now, there is no Novas in this enemy fleet. But honestly, that's probably bad for me, because Novas with their big glaring openings at the sides and their tiny little shield arc at the front very easily die to a Pegasus with some missiles. Because as soon as it turns away to face something else, you can fire like one volley of Hurricanes at it and it just dies immediately. It's kind of an easy target. And you'll notice this is exactly what I'm talking about with the importance of electronic warfare. We cap this, and we really want to grab this in order to deploy our friendly neighborhood conquest. Or you could leave something else in the back. But in this case, I chose to leave the conquest in the back. And, well, the enemy's taken this point. What are we going to do? How are we going to get rid of it? Well, the Falcon's going to be pretty good at getting this off the point, possibly even killing it. And once it's gone out of the way, we can capture this in like 2 seconds, thanks to the electronic warfare skill. And even as our ships back off of the point from the pressure from the enemy fleet, they can't capture the point because of the range bonus. It's really, really nice. Look at this. So where normally you would want fast attack frigates in order to capture the points so that you can guarantee that you actually get a chance to deploy your full fleet, electronic warfare kind of bypasses that problem. That being said, I do think this fleet would probably be better. No, it would certainly be better if it had some fast attack frigates instead of committing to the midline theme. Fast attack frigates, just purely being able to run around and capture the points at high speed, is going to mess with the AI by itself. That by itself is really annoying for the AI. And being annoying to the AI is a very, very useful tool. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to do too much. Like, I do want to look at the other ships and just kind of watch them do their thing, but as I mentioned before, that's going to cause the Pegasus to waste a lot of ammo, and we're going to need it. One nice thing you can do with the Pegasus is you can actually spam your system on purpose as a way to drive up your soft flux and convince the enemy ships to get more aggressive towards you. But because it's soft flux, you can kind of just stop shooting and let it dissipate naturally, which means that the enemies get super baited into attacking you without ever actually getting to accomplish anything, and then you can just continually back up while they recklessly dive towards you and the rest of your fleet munches on them. That's a strategy you can always use. Let's see, you're up there. See, look at this. He's doing his job. Look at this. There's synergy. They're working together. And I don't even have to tell them to do anything. They're just doing it by themselves. Pretty cool, huh? I don't think I'm going to have to give them too many orders. Speaking of which, I should probably make some kind of guide about how to use fleet orders effectively. But at the same time, then I have to also get into like fleet composition and what different ships are capable of. And then that also kind of ties into loadouts. And I don't want to. I want to make it something comprehensive. I don't want to like just ramble through the whole thing, which would mean that I'd probably have to like write things down and like make notes. Maybe I should do you know what I should do? I should do a PowerPoint presentation, like this is high school. That's what I should do. I should make here's a fleet guide. Here's my PowerPoint presentation on how to do fleet good. Here's how you manage yourself in a fleet action. I know, it sounds very exciting. Although there is a guy who's managed to shift his career from, well, not exactly career. He made YouTube videos of playing video games. And then I stopped watching for a while. And then the next thing I know, he's making PowerPoints about defense economics and getting way more views. Yes, I am talking about Perun. It's really funny. I'm one of the few people who can say I was watching his gameplay videos before he blew up for talking about real-world defense economics. Yeah, I'm kind of an OG. I'm kind of a big deal. But yeah, you can definitely... Hopefully you can see why I've designed them the way that I've designed them. Like, yes, S-mods make a big difference here, but... Like, I've captured all these points despite having a complete lack of faster ships, just due to the power of the ECM skill. And then the other skills that I've had, and the layout that I've gone with for all these ships, they're mostly just sitting back at a long, safe distance and shooting the enemy to death. And this is why I don't really think shorter range builds will obviously work against human fleets because, well, human fleets don't exactly pose as much of a challenge. And in that sense, you could say that human fleets let you get away with more fun stuff. Stuff that's fun, but not as effective. Whereas this is fun, but the threshold's more limiting. Although discovering exactly what works is kind of the fun, too, right? It's a weird dance where you want to take on the harder challenges to figure out what works. Because the process of figuring out what works is fun, but then once you figure out what works and then you want to try new things, the harder challenges become limiting because there's a lot of stuff that doesn't work, even though it looks cool. So then you go back to doing easier fights so you can do stuff that you want to do, but then the fights are too easy and you want to try and figure out something more narrow for these difficult fights. It's a delicate dance. Let's see. You know what? I'm just going to let my shift drift backwards. I'm going to watch somebody do stuff. Let's watch you do your thing. How you doing? And then the harpoons should finish that off. And then look at that. Turret gyros and elite ballistic mastery to make sure that it can very easily hit those frigates. And, of course, something I didn't mention. Always make sure that you go into the weapon groups and split these across the two sides. Because if you don't, the AI is going to try and control all four of them at the same time, manually. And this is going to result in some really weird shooting patterns, where there's going to be like a frigate here, and these two guns are shooting, but they're shooting at blank space off to the side, because the AI is manually aiming the left side at something else. If they're all in the same firing group, it's going to cause some problems. And it automatically puts them in the same firing group because they're the same weapon. Normally that makes sense, but in the conquest case, you have to manually go in and change that. I can't think of a good transition, so I'm just going to start talking about the amazing Rizzler now. Yeah, we're going there. I was talking about stupid jokes at the beginning. Boy, do I have more stupid jokes to completely destroy my brain, because I've seen edits people have done of Spider-Man movies where they replace the dialogue using AI to mimic the voices, and the dialogue they replace it with is just so much. It's just jam-packed of Gen Z lingo. The brain rot is real. But man, some of them are pretty funny. Your father and I were marked for having no riz, not only by sigmas at large, but by alphas as well. They called us sussy bacchus. But then your father started mewing and everything changed. The results were beyond bussin'. They were dead ass. And then it was over. He was cooked. It's like, damn, I don't even know what half of that means. But he says it so sincerely. And that's the best part, is when you take something that's really stupid and should not be taken seriously, and you treat it with 100% seriousness, it becomes funny. I don't know why it works that way, or maybe it just works that way for me. My brain works in mysterious ways sometimes. Yeah, you can see I didn't really have to do much with the orders here. If you have cautious officers with long-range ships and good speed and good shields... I mean, this is why high-tech isn't allowed to have long-range weapons. This is why. They're already doing really good with short-range weapons. If you also gave them long-range weapons, they would do this, but better. Okay, I forgot. I still have hold fire on. My mistake. I was wondering why nothing was happening. Yes, yes, yes. Shoot at me all you like. Alright. I'm gonna dump a bunch of high explosives into you now. Alright, let's... Yes, bring in the fighters. Help me finish the target. I mean, obviously I could finish him off by firing another volley of hurricanes, but it did save me a volley. And since fighters never really run out of ammo, that is actually pretty useful. It always feels good to get one of those guys in the back. It's like a little backstab. Alright, let's drop all of this. I think now I'm not going to be too worried about ammo. I can autopilot my ship. Watch some of the fun that they're having. Oh wow, you actually took some damage there. Come on, get the engines. Oh wow. I mean, this actually has frontal shield conversion, which is pretty rare for the remnants. They usually don't take shield conversion hull mods, but I guess some of them do. Interesting. Yeah, I'm just going to exit here. Or am I? Because I do think I want to do one more battle with this fleet. Or you know what, never mind. It would be a bit redundant, because you can use console commands to force deploy the entire simulator, or at least the current simulator before they update it and make it actually good. But you can force deploy the whole thing, and sometimes you can have fleets that are good against remnants, but bad against the simulator. And sometimes you can have fleets that are good at killing the entire simulator, but bad against remnants. This is a case where the fleet is good against both. And showing that off could be interesting, but I think I'm going to cut it off here.